Ivan Andreevich Belov, 48 years old, stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, like an old boulder worn smooth by centuries and winds. The morning frost burned his lungs, but his face, furrowed with wrinkles like the beds of dry mountain rivers, remained impassive. His short-cropped, thick silver hair barely caught the cool light of the Siberian dawn. His heavy, incredibly attentive gaze, for which he had earned the nickname Raven, was fixed on the ground. He was reading the tracks. It was not just the imprint of a large moose's hoof on the ground dusted with night snow. It was a whole story of fear, pain, and disturbed balance. The animal walked heavily, unevenly. One of its steps was noticeably shorter, and the furrow left by its injured leg was interrupted only in places where the beast desperately tried to jump to regain its lost rhythm. The raven crouched down, barely touching the glove. The ground cooled overnight, and slowly, with the tip of his finger, traced the dark, almost black drop of blood caked on the edge of the trail. The blood was fresh, from yesterday, and the wound, judging by its small size, was not fatal, but serious enough to cause the animal to panic, which, according to the laws of the taiga, was much more dangerous than the wound itself. A faithful West Siberian Laika named Shadow, so named for her ability to glide silently through the forest, sat patiently nearby, not making a sound, only occasionally raising her sharp muzzle to catch a gust of frosty air. The dog completely trusted the man, as if she knew that the hunt would only end when her master decided. The raven sensed Shadow's anxiety, which mirrored his own inner state. The elk did not give up, but his attempts to deceive the pain and slow down the predator were futile. It was the logic of a hunted animal that knows that the natural order has been disrupted. In his world, the world of the taiga, any mistake was punished immediately, and no amount of money or connections could buy him forgiveness or a second chance. Here, the rules were simple, cruel, but at the same time, absolutely fair. Ivan's internal code was carved out by these very rules. His thoughts were interrupted by a crack. Not the crack of a branch or ice, but a sharp, alien sound. A cell phone ringing. Voron took an old push-button phone out of his inside pocket. The number was a Moscow area code, but Raven knew who could be calling him in such a remote place. Colonel Grigory Semyonovich Karelin, an old acquaintance who, despite his weariness with the system, still continued to serve in the Yekaterinburg Internal Affairs Department. Ivan held the phone in his hands for a few seconds before answering, as if trying to delay his return to the world he had left many years ago. A world of dusty offices, false promises, and crimes that did not smell of gunpowder or damp earth, but smelled much worse, of greed and impunity. I'm listening. Ivan's voice was low, hoarse, slow, as if each word had weight and should not be wasted. He did not waste words when it was not necessary, and waited. Raven, it's Grisha. I know you'll send me away, but I need your help. I really need it, Ivan. I really need it. Colonel Karelin's voice was tired, creaky, like old leather. This man knew the price Raven had paid for his honor, and for the time he was fired from the Scion Reserve when he crossed paths with an influential official. Since then, Voron had despised city laws, and the entire elite, who considered themselves masters of life, but became helpless amateurs as soon as they stepped outside the asphalt. Voron remained silent, allowing the pause to put pressure on Karelin. He understood that if Grisha was calling him here, it meant that the city detectives had really reached a dead end, and needed someone who could read what was not written on paper. What is this about? Voron asked, his voice betraying neither curiosity nor concern, only cold detachment. They found a body. Igor Leonidovich Fydrin. Do you know who he is? A high-ranking official from the Committee on Natural Resources. He oversaw all these new projects to develop the taiga. They found him yesterday evening, abandoned on the very border of the Shartash Forest Park and the city. It looks like he got lost. Or maybe he was attacked by vagrants or a wild animal. The examination says he was badly beaten, but the cause of death, we don't understand yet. It's too messy, too unclear. Everything points to an accident or robbery, but I feel that's not the case.
Here, Ivan. Someone really wanted us to think that the criminal went into the forest. The word official aroused Voron's hostility, which was physically felt as a metallic taste in his mouth.
Officials are those who sell his taiga, his world, for the sake of numbers in their accounts.
He knew Igor Vidrin, knew his slippery reputation and his passion for expensive but pointless hunts, where the main trophy was not the game itself, but the opportunity to be photographed with it. Let your city detectives look for him in their offices, Grisha. I'm not looking for missing money or stolen iPhones. I'm looking for a disturbed balance.
And this man himself disturbed it during his lifetime, Voron replied, his voice becoming slightly lower, slightly harsher. I know, but that's exactly why I'm calling you. Imbalance is your forte. And besides, Ivan, this is my old debt. Remember how you saved me on Mali Tagash? I'm paying you back. Come over, consult with us. Just tell us where to look.
You're the only one who can sense when there's a stranger in the forest, even if that forest is a pathetic city park. Colonel Karelin pressed on a personal note, and it was the only thing that could pierce the armor of the reserved raven.
Ivan did not seek revenge, but he did not forget kindness. He trusted only his dog and the few people who had proven their honesty to him where money had no power, in the taiga. Voron stood up. He took a deep breath, feeling the clean, pine-scented air. He looked at the moose's tracks. The animal, driven by pain, was retreating deep into the forest. In the city, a man driven by greed was walking on the asphalt, trying to cover his tracks. The raven saw a similarity and a disgusting difference in this. The moose followed its instinct. The man followed his calculations. And these calculations always left a dirtier, more obvious trail. Give me 2 hours. I'll be in town by 11. The words came out with difficulty, as if he were agreeing to leave part of his soul in this forest. He hung up without waiting for thanks or unnecessary questions, and put the phone back in his inside pocket. Shadow, as if sensing her master's inner decision, got up and pressed herself against his leg. Raven lowered his hand, stroked the dog's neck, and looked into her eyes. Shadow, let's go. We need to see what kind of beast their city greed has driven them to. Let's go. We need to get to the asphalt, Voron whispered. His words betrayed a poorly concealed contempt for the place he was heading to, its laws and its people. The only thing that drove him was the unspoken intervention of fate, which once again brought him face to face with the injustice he despised most. He headed for his old, well-traveled car, parked on a country road, and the world of the taiga began to slowly but inevitably shrink behind him, giving way to a world of lies and shadows, the world of Yekaterinburg.
Voron arrived in Yekaterinburg at exactly 11 in the morning, as promised. Although that promise had been as difficult to keep as uprooting a century-old stump. His old, angular but reliable Neva seemed like a misplaced rock amid the stream of polished glass and chrome. The city greeted him with a din that Raven despised, not the living noise of the forest, but the dead mechanical hum of thousands of engines jostling in a senseless rush. Towering, indifferent skyscrapers, clad in mirrored glass, reflected the grey Ural sky, creating a feeling of cold, artificial emptiness. This architecture, this pile of concrete and metal, seemed to Ivan to be the most vivid example of a disturbed balance, where human greed tried to reach the clouds without having roots in the ground. The air here was heavy, saturated with smoke and nervousness. The shadow lying on the back seat whimpered quietly but persistently, unable to hide its anxiety. Like its owner, it was alien to this stone trap. Colonel Karelin met him at the traffic police headquarters, exchanging only 2 words and a short, firm handshake that needed no lengthy explanations. He looked older, and even more tired than he had on the phone, as if the city was squeezing the last of his vitality out of him. Karelin did not keep Voron in the offices, knowing full well that he needed not papers, but land. He immediately introduced him to his lieutenant, the investigator who was handling the case, Captain Vera Igorevna Svetlova. She was a woman of about 28, with sharp, intelligent features, her light hair neatly pulled back into a strict ponytail, and a gaze full of cold, almost laboratory-like logic. She wore an impeccably ironed jacket, and her entire posture expressed undisguised skepticism toward the man in the old, faded field jacket, with a face that looked as if it had been carved from granite. Captain Svetlova, this is Ivan Andreevich Belov, our consultant. Karelin introduced him, emphasizing the word consultant with a certain irony, as if apologizing. Svetlova held out her hand to Ivan. The handshake was short, dry, without unnecessary warmth. Captain Svetlova, I have reviewed your previous recommendations. A very unconventional approach, Ivan Andreevich. As you understand, we prefer facts and reports from criminologists. Her voice was clear, devoid of emotional modulation, like a robot's. Voron just nodded. He had no intention of arguing with her. For him, facts and reports were just an attempt by the city bureaucracy to systematize the chaos it had created itself, without trying to understand its true nature. He didn't care what she thought. He had come to repay a debt, not to win her respect. The body had been found on the eastern outskirts of the city, at the junction of a busy avenue and the Chartash Forest Park. It was not a forest, but a parody of one. Sparse, sickly pine trees planted in rows, suffocating from the proximity of the highway, with unnaturally clean undergrowth littered with cigarette butts and empty plastic bottles. The edge of the forest was clearly marked, an asphalt path, and immediately beyond it, dirty, loose soil. The body of Igor Vidrin, an official who had overseen billion-dollar contracts during his lifetime, was found literally 50 meters from the walking path, next to a fallen pine tree. The body itself was no longer there, but the area was carefully marked off with police tape, flags, and small numbered plates indicating evidence. Voron stopped before crossing the tape. He unclipped Tenny's leash. "Tenny, go," he commanded quietly, and the dog, as if sensing the true goal, slipped forward, not breaking the cordon but bypassing it, instinctively searching for the scent boundary. Captain Svetlova crossed her arms over her chest, watching this performance with obvious displeasure.
The forensic team has been working here for 6 hours. Everything has been documented, from every pine needle to the smallest scratches on the tree. I don't think your dog will find anything that the soil analysis missed, she said through gritted teeth.
Voron did not deign to look at her. His heavy, calm, and incredibly attentive gaze fixed on the ground. He wasn't looking at the flags, but at the space between them, at how the micro-relief and soil structure had been disturbed. He ignored their reports of injuries and the evidence collected in clear plastic bags. He was interested in only one question. How had the natural order of things been disturbed here? He slowly walked around the spot where the body lay. Svetlova told him the official version. The official had gone for a walk, slipped, hit his head on a tree trunk, and then, possibly, been robbed by random vagrants. Or it was a staged robbery. Voron listened to these words as if they were distant, meaningless background noise. He crouched down where, according to the experts, the head had been. The soil here was loose and slightly damp. But in one place he noticed something strange. The earth had been trampled twice, once by the fall, and the second time by a careful, overly neat press. He ran his finger over the trampled moss.
It was crushed but not torn. Not as if a falling person had desperately slid over it, but as if it had been pressed down.
The body position was wrong, Raven said in a low, hoarse voice, addressing no one in particular, as if voicing his thoughts aloud. A person who slips and hits their head falls forward, their arms reflexively stretching out to protect their face or chest. The official was lying, as if he had been laid down, not thrown but laid down, carefully, to create the illusion of a fall. Svetlova snorted. The examination established that the muscles were relaxed, which corresponds to a state of shock or loss of consciousness after a blow, or after death.
Voron interrupted her, his gaze piercing her confidence like a blade. He pointed to a thin aspen branch sticking out of the ground. It was broken in 3 places, and all 3 breaks were clean, with no fibrous fringe, no signs of twisting or jerking. A falling person in a panic doesn't break branches so neatly.
They tear them out or rip them off. This is a bend from the movement of the body when the killer dragged it and tried to squeeze it past obstacles. He tried to make the scene look like a struggle with the elements, but he got the details wrong. He doesn't understand how the forest works. He only knows what it looks like. The shadow returned, stopped at the edge of the clearing, and growled quietly, staring at the asphalt path.
Laika was not interested in the forest. She had caught a foreign scent. Raven followed her gaze. He saw what everyone else had missed. A faint, barely noticeable tire mark on the edge of the asphalt, where the ground met the concrete. It was not the mark of a typical city SUV. The tread was wide, with a deep, aggressive pattern designed for deep snow and mud. A typical tire for serious off-roading, for the real taiga. The track was only half a meter long, but to Raven it was louder than any scream. The killer isn't from the taiga, but he just came from it. Or at least, from very deep off-road terrain. Voron straightened up. His conclusion was final and sounded like a verdict. He was brought here. The official didn't go for a walk. They brought him here, killed him, and then laid him here to make it look like an accident, or the work of a local homeless person, or a wild animal. The killer is an amateur who has watched too many wildlife films but has never been in the wild. He tried to make it look like the work of a wild animal,
but left someone else's footprint. Svetlova turned pale.
She looked at Voron.
Then at Karelin, who just shrugged his shoulders with a look that said, "I told you so." She took out her notebook, and for the first time, her confident hand trembled slightly. His conclusion contradicted everything their crime lab had said, but it was so logical, so correct from the point of view of the natural order of things, that it was impossible to deny it. "He was trying to imitate wild nature," Voron repeated, his eyes narrowing and his gaze becoming even heavier. "But this isn't wild nature. It's a city, writhing with greed. And it was greed, a hunted man, not a hungry beast, that caused the murder." The official Vidrin was in someone's way, and the person who got rid of him knows what the taiga looks like, but doesn't know how it behaves. Voron turned to Karelin, wasting no time on Svetlov. "I don't need autopsy reports. I need his working papers. Maps, projects, applications he rejected. And immediately. I need to understand what natural order he violated before he was eliminated. People don't get killed for no reason in this city. There's always the smell of greed here." He left the cordon, shadow following him, and found himself once again amid the roar of engines. He felt the city's hustle and bustle and lies begin to envelop him, penetrate his skin. But now his disbelief was reinforced by an obsession with the truth. He couldn't allow his world, the world of the taiga, to be used as a cover for dirty city business. He looked up at the tallest skyscraper, its glass blinding in the sun. Up there, in this city of shadows, sat the one who considered himself above the law. And Raven knew it was his duty to find him and restore the balance that had been disrupted. He got into the car, leaving Captain Svetlova standing by the police tape. And for the first time, her eyes showed not contempt, but a barely noticeable, wary disbelief in her own former view of the world. The conference room of the Internal Affairs Department on Frunze Street was a model of sterile official luxury, which Raven despised most of all. The cold light, reflecting off the polished table, had nothing in common with the living light of the sun breaking through the taiga canopy. The air was thick with the acrid smell of cleaning products, mixed with the scent of expensive cologne, and a subtle but, to Ivan, unmistakable note of fear. Voron himself, in his faded functional hiking clothes which smelled of campfires, damp earth, and clean snow, looked out of place here, like a bear that had wandered into a greenhouse. His boots, carelessly wiped at the entrance, still brought in a little sand and pine needles, and this dirt seemed like a challenge here. 5 people sat around the table. Colonel Karelin, hunched over and silent. Captain Svetlova, writing something down with a concentrated look. 2 high-ranking colleagues of the deceased official, Pyotr Antonovich Gordeev and Nikolai Viktorovich Vlasov, and finally, the widow, Elena Semyonovna Vidrina. Gordeev and Vlasov were dressed in impeccable dark blue suits, their faces expressing just as much grief as official protocol required. Exaggerated seriousness, a slight frown, and a complete absence of real, living emotions. The widow, an elegant woman in a black dress, with a string of pearls around her neck, seemed to be holding herself together only with the help of expensive sedatives and enormous willpower, focused on maintaining her social status rather than grieving her loss. Voron sat down, placing his old worn notebook in front of him, which contained only his own notes and sketches. He did not say a word, allowing them to begin the performance, which he mentally called the triumph of asphalt. Pyotr Antonovich Gordeev, deputy chairman of the same committee as the deceased, cleared his throat and began to speak. Ivan Andreevich,
We appreciate that you responded to our request, but with all due respect to your specific experience, we hope that your presence here will be limited to formal consultation. The case of Igor Leonidovich, as we see it, is a matter of everyday crime, possibly related to his fondness for walking in the woods or an unsuccessful robbery. The public outcry is great, and we are obliged. Voron raised his heavy, calm gaze. He did not interrupt him, but that gaze, like the unblinking eye of a bird of prey, made Gordeev pause and swallow. Public outcry is noise. Noise is meaningless, Voron said slowly in a low, hoarse voice, and his words rang out in the silence of the room with a weight that the verbose reports did not have. I saw the place. I saw the body, as it is described in the reports. This is not an accident. This is not robbery. This is murder, staged to look like an accident. Professional, but with mistakes. Mistakes that only a person who does not understand the logic of the taiga, the logic of life, could make. There was a dead silence. Elena Vidrina, the widow, pressed a handkerchief to her lips, but there was no horror in her eyes at what she had heard. Only tension. She was prepared for condolences, for discussing the funeral, for investigating the cause of death, but not for such a direct, cruel accusation. Nikolai Viktorovich Vlasov, a younger and outwardly nervous official, immediately tried to divert attention. What mistakes? Our forensic experts have presented 5 arguments in favor of an accidental fall. He has broken ribs, a head injury. Voron put 2 fingers on the table, stopping his flow of words. 2. First, the position of the body. A person who falls dead or loses consciousness from a blow does not lie down as if he is posing. His body was placed there. His muscles are relaxed because he was killed before he was brought to the forest, or immediately after. Second, they tried to explain his death as the work of an animal, but left behind a foreign trace. A car tire mark. This is not the mark of an off-road vehicle for leisure driving, but of tires for heavy off-road use. Why would a person who just went out for some fresh air need such tires? He doesn't need them. They are needed by someone who comes from a place where there is real mud and real taiga. The killer is not from the forest, but he wants us to think so. He tried to disrupt the natural course of events, but introduced a foreign element into it. He turned his gaze back to the officials. Gordeev and Vlasov exchanged brief, almost imperceptible glances, which revealed momentary confusion and quickly restored firmness. They put on their armor of lies, consisting of official instructions and politeness. Ivan Andreevich, if you suspect a setup, then name a motive that is not related to money or personal relationships. Vidrin was a public figure. His murder on the grounds of large-scale corruption is not just a crime. It's... Gordeev did not finish, afraid to utter a word that could blow up this office. Voron shook his head. There is always one motive. Greed. Greed in the taiga smells different. Like logging, sold land, murky water in which gold is panned. And in the city, it smells like expensive leather and fear. I'm looking for a disruption in the natural order of things that has manifested itself even here, in a civilized city. Vidrin oversaw resources. That means he either stood in the way of someone's greed or was part of it himself. And someone decided that he had become a sick individual who needed to be removed from the ecosystem. Elena Vidrina spoke for the first time, her voice low and steady.
Igor was never involved in anything illegal. He was an honest man, and he always treated nature with great reverence. He loved the taiga. Voron looked at her, his heavy gaze penetrating her mask of grief and nobility. He sensed insincerity in her words, not in her grief, but in her exaggeration. He loved the taiga, the raven repeated, as if tasting the word. Does he have his hunting trophies at home? Probably in beautiful frames, in his study. The widow flinched, but quickly regained her composure. Of course, Igor was a hunter, but only of game. He was a professional. A hunter knows what life and death are. A hunter knows how to behave in the forest. And your husband was found lying unnaturally. A hunter would not have fallen like that. Your husband was killed. And his killer tried to make it look like someone else did it. Someone from the forest. But that someone else would not have left a tire mark from a car designed for real off-road driving. I don't believe in his love for the taiga. A man who loves the taiga would not allow his death to become a dirty lie designed to cover up someone's brazen, urban greed. Voron looked at Gordeev and Blasov again. The conflict reached its peak. Gordeev, regaining his composure, delivered a bureaucratic blow. Ivan Andreevich, with all due respect to your instincts, we work according to the criminal code. We have expert conclusions. We have procedures. We don't need your philosophy. We need concrete steps. We are waiting for your recommendations on the search for vagrants. You are a specialist in search operations. That's what you should be doing. Further investigation of the Voron case will be conducted by Captain Svetlova, in cooperation with your recommendations, but without violating procedural norms. We expect formalities from you, not the truth, which could undermine the stability of the committee. Voron nodded. He understood everything. They don't want the truth. They want formalities that will allow them to close the case and preserve the armor of lies that covers up corruption in the highest echelons of power. His contemptuous attitude toward this city elite only grew stronger. He stood up, his figure short but wiry, seeming enormous against the backdrop of their polished but empty luxury. Fine, said Voron, and there was no agreement in that word. Only a promise. I need all the documents relating to illegal logging, gold mining, and development of taiga territories over the past 2 years that Voron was involved in. All rejection requests, all maps, all projects. Captain Svetlova, give them to me. I'm not looking for vagrants. I'm looking for the scent of greed on these papers. He turned and, without saying goodbye, left the room, leaving only silence and confusion behind him. Gordeev sighed heavily, and Vlasov nervously adjusted his tie. Svetlova stared at the door behind which Voron had disappeared, and for the first time ever, there was no skepticism in her eyes, only a vague, anxious premonition that this formal consultation would turn her whole life upside down. Captain Svetlova, still visibly irritated but no longer as openly skeptical as she had been half an hour ago, complied with Voron's request with cold, methodical precision. Documents relating to Igor Vedrin's work at the Committee on Natural Resources filled the entire small interrogation room that Karelin had temporarily allocated to consultant. Thousands of sheets, stapled together and arranged in neat folders, financial reports, regional government resolutions,
meeting minutes, and most importantly, geographical maps and development plans for the territories.
The papers smelled of printing ink, office dust, and the formaldehyde of bureaucracy.
Svetlova leaned over the table and pointed to the stack. Here, this is everything related to the Siberian Ring project, the development of new territories for raw materials extraction and tourism. There are millions here, Ivan Andreevich. Look here if you need your smell of greed. Cash, money laundering, kickbacks. The whole scheme is on the surface. Voron did not even glance at the financial reports. He knew that true greed never hides in numbers.
Numbers are just a screen created to lull the attention of people like Svetlova. Real, animalistic greed. The kind that makes a person break natural law and kill. Always leaves a mark on the earth, in the form of a disfigured landscape, uprooted forests, or murky water. He pushed the accounting folders away from him, focusing his heavy, calm gaze on a stack of old maps, rolled up and secured with rubber bands. These maps, covered with protective lamination, smelled completely different. Of forest, pine needles, damp soil, and real, non-urban disorder. Raven unfolded the first one on the polished table, and the gray artificial light of the office immediately dimmed before the detailed, vivid topography of the taiga forests.
"You're looking the where he stole it," Raven said quietly, leaning over the map. His voice was low and hoarse.
And I'm looking for what he tried to save or prevent from being stolen. He ran his hand over the map, as if feeling the relief, sensing the contour lines, rivers and swamps. His fingers, accustomed to rough bark and cold stone, easily found anomalies on the paper. He ignored all the legal logging areas and quarry markings, his attention drawn to a small, densely shaded area on the border between the Sverdlovsk and Chelyabinsk regions, where something strange was visible on the large-scale photograph. According to the official story, it was a site for the prospective construction of a tourist base. But on old aerial photographs, which the official Vidrin had apparently filed separately, Voron saw something else. Characteristic yellow patches of washed-up soil, thin, spiderweb-like lines of roads leading nowhere, and strange bald spots among centuries-old pine trees that did not resemble a normal legal plot of land. Svetlova, watching him, came closer and closer, forgetting her skepticism. She saw how this unsociable man read information from the paper, not with his eyes, but it seemed with his instincts. He was not looking for a mistake in the calculations, but for a violation of the natural course of things reflected on the map. This is the area where Vidrin blocked the issuance of a license to the Ural Zoloto Company. They wanted to start mining on the Istok stream. He gave an official refusal the month before last, citing the fact that it is a water catchment area, Svetlova explained, a note of professional excitement appearing in her voice. Voron grunted but did not look away from the map. He didn't just block it. He blocked it desperately. Look, he pointed to the edge of the sector. On one of the maps, this area was marked as a specially protected natural area, with a green marker, and on the next one, in the latest documents, it was already listed as a promising development zone, with a red dividing line. But the line itself was roughly and nervously circled in blue pencil by Vidrin. Voron sensed that in the last days of his life, the official had been cornered, trying to fend off predators who wanted to get their hands on this piece of land. He tried to play by the rules when others had already switched to the law of the jungle, muttered Voron. The official was either a roof that had begun to collapse, or an obstacle that had to be removed. And judging by this blue pencil, he was an obstacle. Raven looked up at Svetlova, his gaze dark. This land, this stream, these spots on the aerial photographs. That's the smell of greed. It's not just money, Captain. It's illegal gold mining. These are serious people who won't stop at murder because of some official. They've already desecrated my taiga, and now their greed has come here, to your asphalt.
And that tire track I saw at Shartash Park.
He moved the roll aside, revealing a small folder with technical data. Inside was a request to purchase special equipment for developing that very territory. Voron pulled a sheet with the specifications of a heavy off-road vehicle and a photo of the tread pattern out of the folder. He had no doubts. The tread pattern he had seen on the wet asphalt, near the place where the body was found, matched perfectly with the one on this sheet. It was a specific, rarely used pattern, designed for transporting heavy equipment over rough terrain.
It was a foreign trace that led straight to the door of the company that had been rejected by Vidrin. That's where the killer came from. Voron put his finger on the photo of the tire tread. This is their car.
And it was greed, a driven man, not wild nature, that caused the murder. Vidrin crossed the path of those who had already managed to wash gold, or cut down trees where they shouldn't have. Or maybe he knew too much about their plans for the future. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they got rid of him, and tried to do it in such a way that the police would look for some unfortunate drunk or vagrant in the forest. It's an insult. They thought that I, or someone else, wouldn't be able to read these tracks. The Raven felt a familiar, cold determination rise within him. For him, this was not just a murder investigation. It was the defense of his world, his code.
Those who desecrate the taiga for gold and then use its name to cover up their urban lies are sick individuals.
And his job was to remove them from the ecosystem in order to restore the disturbed order. Svetlova finally admitted that her clean, logical picture of the world had collapsed. She pushed her financial reports aside, her face pale. So, Vidrin was perhaps an honest man who paid for his refusal. He was an obstacle to wealth.
And Zadorozhny.
Zadorozhny? Voron stared at her, a dangerous, predatory gleam flashing in his eyes. Svetlova hastily explained. Oleg Vitalyevich Zadorozhny, CEO of the company Ural Zoloto. He personally filed an appeal against Vidrin's refusal.
He's a very important figure in the city, close to the mayor's office. Here, his name appears in several minutes of meetings on the Siberian Ring project. She handed him a thin blue folder. Voron took it, but did not open it. The name Zadorozhny was already imprinted in his mind. He got up and put on his walking jacket. I've found the scent of greed, Captain. Now we need to find where they're hiding it. I'm going to the widow's house. I need to see how a man who supposedly loved the taiga lived in the city. His house, his lifestyle, his habits. If Vidrin was an obstacle, he couldn't have been simply removed without leaving a trace. Civilized traces can be much more obvious than traces in the snow. In the meantime, find out everything you can about Zadorozhny, Captain. Where he's from, how long he's been involved in gold mining, and who's covering for him at City Hall.
And keep it to yourself. He nodded at the printed tire tread. Voron left the stuffy office, leaving Svetlov alone with a pile of papers. Shadow was waiting for him by the car, wagging his tail impatiently. Voron opened the door, letting the dog jump into the back seat.
"Let's go, Shadow. To the lair," said Raven. His voice sounded unwaveringly determined.
The city elite, thinking they were dealing with a naive amateur from the woods, had made their first and most serious mistake. They had summoned Raven to the City of Shadows, and now he would not stop until he restored order. The Vidrin family home was located in one of the gated communities on the western outskirts of the city, where the asphalt was perfect and the silence was absolute and unnatural. It was not the silence of the taiga, filled with the rustle of life and the distant hum of the wind, but the dead silence of concrete walls and strict discipline. Here, behind the high fences, neither the noise of the street nor the chaos of wild nature penetrated. Parking his old Niva next to the widow's immaculate Lexus, Raven felt like an uninvited guest, bringing with him the smell of truth, which this environment was trying with all its might to eradicate. The shadow he left in the car did not whimper, but its tension was palpable. It felt that it was in a territory alien to any living instinct, where even the grass on the lawns seemed synthetic. Yelena Semyonovna Vidrina met him at the door, dressed in an expensive but modest pantsuit, with perfectly styled hair, and a face on which fatigue was carefully controlled, as if she were revealing it in portions, according to regulations. Voron understood immediately. This woman was not mourning her husband. She was surviving in a situation of lies. Her task was to maintain her social status, to create an impression of respectability and inconsolable grief that would deter unnecessary questions. She was an actress, but Voron was a spectator who knew how to read not words but the intonations of breath. They went into the living room, a huge space with Italian furniture, where every piece of interior design screamed about price rather than taste or comfort.
Voron sat down in an armchair that seemed too soft, too yielding, as if it were meant to weaken his will.
In the center of the room stood a glass coffee table with a thin, glossy folder containing photographs of Igor Vidrin, an official in expensive hiking gear, with binoculars around his neck, against a backdrop of mountains and forests. A classic attempt to portray himself as a man of nature. Voron raised his heavy, calm gaze to Elena, who was preparing to answer formal questions about her husband's last days. You claimed in the office that he loved the taiga. Voron began, not giving her a chance to start her prepared speech. He spoke slowly, in a low voice, stretching out his words so that they entered the silence of the living room like heavy stones into smooth water. I've seen his photos. He always looked like he was posing, not living there. Was he a hunter of game, as you said, or a hunter of beautiful pictures? Elena paled slightly, but immediately put on a mask of offense. Igor really loved nature. He often went away. Of course, he was a civil servant, and his trips to the forest were more for relaxation than survival. But he knew a lot about equipment. He was a real man. Equipment, Voron repeated, nodding. He stood up and, to the widow's surprise, did not examine the expensive paintings on the walls, but headed for the hallway. He was not looking for clues, but for a shift in human logic. He was looking for the place where lies meet reality. It was in the hallway next to the coat rack, where perfectly clean, new down jackets hung, that he found what he was looking for. A row of hiking boots, all clean, dry, looking as if they had been bought yesterday and never worn. His attention was drawn to heavy, tall leather boots with thick, aggressive soles. These are the kind of boots worn by hunters and inspectors in the deep taiga. But these boots were absolutely clean and unworn.
These boots, Voron pointed at them without touching them. These aren't shoes for walking in the park. They're for mud, for fords, for waist-deep snow. You said he loved the taiga.
Did he wear them often? Eleanor followed him, and the nervousness she had so carefully concealed began to show in the fine lines around her mouth. Yes, they're his. He bought them for a big expedition he was planning with his friends. He didn't have time. They were his 50th birthday present. Her voice sounded tense, like a stretched string. She tried to deceive him with social niceties, hiding behind sentimentality. The raven sensed it, just as he sensed the falsehood in the smell. "Something's not right," he said slowly. "A man who loves the taiga wears his boots. He cleans them, takes care of them. But they can't be new. They must smell of pine, damp moss, a little dirt. They must be tanned by the taiga. These are dead. They don't know the forest. They only know the hallway. Your husband was not a man of the forest, Elena Semyonovna. He was a man of asphalt, who wanted to appear to be something else. And here there is a shift in logic. If he didn't wear these boots, why were they displayed in the most prominent place? He turned and looked at her with his incredibly attentive gaze. There was no condemnation in that gaze, only a naked, merciless demand for the truth. Elena took a step back. Her mask cracked. Beneath it was not just grief, but pure animal fear. It was not the fear of loss, but of exposure. Igor, he wanted, if something happened, he wanted everyone to think that he was somewhere he really loved to be, she whispered. And it was the first sincere, though incomplete sentence he had heard from her. It was survival psychology. Not to grieve, but to create a legend that could protect her from the law or from those who killed her husband. The raven understood. The boots, like Vidrin's body in the park, were a prop, part of the staging. But by whom? Vidrin himself? Or those who killed him to reinforce the story of an accident while out walking? More likely the latter. The killer knew that Vidrin liked to pretend to be a hunter. But if the killer knew this detail, it meant he was close to the family. Surviving in a situation of lies is hard work, Elena Semyonovna, said Voron. He felt no hatred toward her, only a quiet, philosophical sadness about how far a person can go from money and comfort. Are you protecting him or yourself? If you lie to me, you lie to yourself, and that will give you no peace. Your husband was killed because he crossed paths not with an animal, but with people who believe that the taiga belongs to them, and that they can desecrate it and then cover it up with urban methods. I'm looking for them. They want to cover their tracks. Are you helping them? Or are you seeking justice? The widow swayed, her lips trembling. She was surviving this situation of lies, but she felt that Voron was a force against which all her social tricks were useless. She was scared, but her fear was not directed at Voron, but at who might be next. He had to. He blocked a major project to get more. He outplayed them. She squeezed out. And it was a confession, broken by his heavy gaze. Raven nodded. He didn't press her further. She had said enough. Her fear was pure. He picked up the clean boots. The leather was cold. They were heavy. He outplayed them. And they don't forgive, said Raven. Those who don't try to cheat nature's laws survive.
And here, your whole life is an attempt to cheat. We need a place where they store their gold and wood, where they can use machines with tires like these. He put the boots back in their place.
Voron left the house, leaving Yelena Semyonovna alone with her luxury and her fear. He walked down the perfect path to his car, where Shadow was waiting for him. Laika immediately calmed down, sensing her master. Voron got behind the wheel, feeling the weight of the city and its lies on him. He knew that now he had to search not only on maps, but also at the real points of contact between the city and the taiga. The tire track he had seen in the park could not have appeared out of nowhere. He needed to find the city taiga, the place where the city's greed hides its dirty trophies. Voron did not return to the traffic police department. He called Karelin from the highway, asking Captain Svetlova to send him the coordinates of all industrial facilities, warehouses, and abandoned sawmills that had ever appeared in Vidrin's documents, especially those related to the Ural Zoloto Company. He didn't believe in coincidences, especially in a city where every piece of land had its price and its owner.
If the killer had arrived in a car with deep-tread tires, it meant that there was an urban taiga in the city, a place where they hid their dirty trophies and laundered money, a place where their heavy equipment could leave the necessary tracks.
His Miva turned off the perfect asphalt onto an old broken road leading to the industrial zone in the north of the city. With every meter, civilization receded, giving way to rusting metal, broken bricks, and dirt that, unlike in the taiga, was poisonously black and greasy. It was not the kind of dirt that nourishes life, but the kind that absorbs it and does not let go. The Shadow sitting in the passenger seat finally felt a little calmer. Here, among the ruins of human labor and forgotten buildings, laws more familiar to her were at work. The laws of decay and hunting. From the dozen addresses sent by Svetlova, Raven chose an old abandoned sawmill, which, according to documents, had been closed 5 years ago. But according to the map, was located in close proximity to a railway line and had a concrete driveway, which, as a rule, was poorly maintained. Voron knew that true greed always seeks not the center, but the periphery, where there are fewer eyes and more opportunities to hide one's crime. He parked behind a dilapidated workshop, ignoring the warning signs, and got out, pulling Shadow's leash behind him. Laika immediately picked up a scent, but not of a person, rather a mixture of odors that blended into a disgusting cocktail. Oil, rot, mold, and most importantly, the smell of pine needles. They walked through the former warehouses. The concrete floors were covered with a thick layer of construction dust, debris, and puddles of rusty water. And here, in this dead urban environment, Raven began to read again. He was looking for a foreign trace that shouldn't have been there, and he found it. On a pile of hardened cement, like a print on clay, Raven saw the imprint of a non-standard tire. It was the same aggressive, deep tread pattern he had seen on the outskirts of Shartash Park, only here it was cleaner, deeper, as if the car had driven here many times, leaving its mark. Voron crouched down, examining the track. He checked the angle and depth of the impression. The truck was heavy, loaded. Loaded with what? He looked up.
There were no logs or lumber around, only mountains of trash. Raven ran his hand over the concrete, and his finger touched something that shouldn't have been at a sawmill. Sand. The sand was fine, reddish, with a metallic sheen. It was not construction sand. Raven knew that this sand was found in the upper reaches of taiga rivers, where mines were dug. It was a sign of the taiga, brought here by the truck. He picked up a broken piece of board from the ground.
The wood was dry, but not ordinary. Voron brought it to his nose. The smell of resin was strong and deep. It was not pine or spruce. It was cedar. Not just cedar, but cedar at least 100 years old. Raven knew that legal logging of such cedar in these parts was either prohibited or cost a fortune, requiring dozens of permits. And here, in an abandoned workshop, the remains of this rare, valuable wood lay scattered like trash. They used the taiga as a cover for illegal business, not as a habitat, Voron whispered. And this workshop is their lair. The urban taiga. It was a direct confrontation with the asphalt. Urban greed had not only killed a man, but had invaded his world, desecrating it. And now it had come to him in the form of these dirty but eloquent traces. Raven and Shadow moved further into the territory. Behind the last intact hangar, he felt the air change. The smell of oil and rot was replaced by the smell of earth, freshness, and metal. It was a smell Raven knew all too well. A smell that always meant trouble in the taiga. Shadow stopped, pricking up her ears, her quiet but insistent bark directed at the single, massive steel door in the hangar wall. Raven walked around the door, examining it. The lock was new and powerful, but there was no dirt or dust around it. The door had been opened frequently. He knelt down. Under the threshold lay a thin, barely noticeable strip of yellow sand. Not just sand, but tiny particles that glistened in the dim light. Raven ran his finger along the line. He didn't need a lab to understand. It was gold. Small, barely visible, but real. They're here. They keep their trophies here. Raven straightened up. He felt a strong surge of rage. For him, it was a personal insult, using his taiga, his law, to cover up their dirty greed. It wasn't just a violation of the law, it was a violation of the natural order of things, manifested in its purest form. Vidrin, an official, tried to stop it, and paid with his life. Voron looked around. No security, only the dead silence of the industrial zone and the hum of the city in the distance, which seemed like a mockery. He realized that the criminals felt completely safe here. They used the dead, abandoned infrastructure of the city as the perfect cover for their illegal business from the taiga. He took out his phone and dialed Svetlova's number. Captain, I need a warrant. Immediately. His voice was quiet but extremely firm. Svetlova, apparently sitting in her office, replied irritably. Ivan Andreevich, do you understand who you are asking to search? This is private property associated with a large company. I need grounds. I can't just... Reason, Voron interrupted, his voice tinged with barely concealed contempt. The reason is the corpse of Vidrin, whose death was staged, with tire tracks leading straight here. to this abandoned workshop.
The grounds are the remains of a 100-year-old cedar tree and the gold-bearing sand under the door. This is a warehouse of what your city greed stole from my forest.
If you can't get a warrant, Captain, then you're as much a part of this lie as those sitting in their offices. Make up your mind. Either you seek justice, or you cover for them.
There was a long, tense pause. Raven knew he was putting pressure on Svetlova, forcing her to make a choice that, as a law enforcement officer, she should not have to make. A choice between the rules and the truth.
But he was acting according to his own code of honor, which did not recognize shades of gray. "Give me an hour," she finally said in a strained voice. "But don't you dare do anything. If you—" Voron hung up the phone. He wasn't going to wait. He had already made his decision. He knew that this hour would give Zadorozhny and his people time to cover their tracks. Voron looked at the locked door of the hangar. He couldn't get inside, but he could use a method that didn't require keys or warrants. He walked over to the hangar wall, where there was a small crack in the concrete. Raven took out his well-used binoculars, not to look at the distant landscape, but to focus on the closest, tiniest detail. He began to read the wall, the thickness of the concrete, the direction of the rebar, the small spots of rust and moss. He was looking for a weak spot, one that amateurs would not notice, but which was obvious to someone who understood how the artificial world crumbled. He knew that a sick individual would not defend itself by the rules, and his work was just beginning. The Raven did not wait for Captain Svetlova to finish her bureaucratic maneuvers in an attempt to obtain a warrant. He moved away from the hangar wall, in whose cracks he had found particles of truth, and sat down on a low concrete slab, forcing himself to calm down. In his world, the world of the taiga, waiting is part of the hunt. But in the city, waiting is losing. Because urban predators use it to cover their tracks. He knew that his call to Svetlova, in which he directly pointed out the connection between the murder and Zadorozhny and illegal business, had already set off a chain reaction. Power, mixed with greed, does not tolerate direct light. It hides in the shadows and strikes first. He did not seek a fight, but he was not afraid of it either. Following the law of nature, he accepted this blow as inevitable. The sick individual had begun to defend itself. He sat motionless, becoming part of the dead industrial landscape, his heavy, calm, and incredibly attentive gaze taking in the surrounding space. Here, in this urban taiga, it was almost as clear to him as in a real forest. In the taiga of Varias, he could sense the approach of a beast by its scent, by the alarm of birds, by the unnatural silence. Here, he sensed it by the smell of fear, emanating from the decaying industrial zone, and by movement. The observer was there, but he was an amateur. A real taiga dweller blends into the background, becomes invisible. But this man, who had parked his dark, too-new car behind a dilapidated water tower 200 meters away, gave himself away with his nervousness and desire to be inconspicuous, which, on the contrary, attracted attention. The Raven did not take any action. He waited until the shadow, who, although she remained in the Neva, began to whimper quietly but persistently, as if warning him. Laika sensed a stranger, not an animal, but a person, sneaking up with bad intentions. Voron slowly got up, adjusted his hiking jacket, and headed for the car. He knew that this observer wasn't just watching. He was waiting for the right moment. They wanted the source of his confidence, his notebook, his notes, which they thought contained diagrams or names.
They didn't understand that his notes were just brief jottings, and that the real map of the crime was in his head, carved out by his instincts.
He walked to the Neva, opened the driver's door, and looked around ostentatiously, letting it be known that he had noticed he was being followed. Then, with casual indifference, he left his worn notebook in plain sight on the dashboard.
It was a decoy. He left the industrial zone and headed for a small roadside cafe that looked like the last refuge for all the losers in this part of town. Raven ordered weak tea and sat by the window watching the road. He didn't have to wait long. 10 minutes later, a dark car pulled away sharply, quickly drove to an abandoned sawmill, and then returned. The amateur had acted too quickly and sloppily. Raven left the cafe without finishing his tea and returned to his car. The notebook was gone. But there was a coincidence. When he tried to start the engine, the Neva made only a quiet, mocking click. Raven opened the hood, and here he saw the city's handiwork. It was not a crude act of sabotage, not a cut wire that could be noticed immediately. It was subtle, almost jeweler-like sabotage. The wire leading to the ignition distributor had been cut with a sharp, thin blade, and then barely pressed down, so that when the engine started, it would break and create the effect of a sudden breakdown on the road. It was a perfect, civilized breakdown that could be blamed on metal fatigue or bad luck. Voron felt no fear, only cold, philosophical rage. They wanted to stop him, scare him, force him to look for repairmen, distract him from the trail. He took a roll of electrical tape and a tiny multifunctional tool out of his bag. The repair took him exactly 3 minutes. He knew this wasn't just a breakdown. It was a warning. He started the car, and immediately, a shiny black Mercedes with tinted windows pulled up beside him. A man in an expensive but boring grey suit got out, briefcase in hand. A typical asphalt functionary, lawyer, or high-ranking clerk. He looked as if he had been forcibly dragged out of an air-conditioned office into this filth. Ivan Andreevich Belov. The man's voice was tense and businesslike. Voron nodded, his heavy gaze fixed directly on him. My clients request that you immediately cease your unauthorized interference in Mr. Vidrin's case. Your conclusions have no legal force, and your actions on private property are illegal. You have been paid for your consultation, Mr. Belov. You have provided it. Now it is time to return to your activities. We have no complaints against you. But if you continue to search for what you should not, we will be forced to take all legal and illegal measures. Consider this a final warning. The lawyer handed him a thin, white envelope. Voron did not take it. He looked at the lawyer as if he were a hunted wolf who, although hiding behind a suit, still gave himself away by the smell of fear emanating from his master, Zadoroshny. You are a man of the law, and you are covering up the criminals. A violation of the natural order of things, Voron said quietly. He spoke slowly, so that each word would pierce the armor of lies and politeness. Your masters are sick individuals. They think they can buy the taiga, kill a man, and cover it up with papers and money. I'm not looking for your money. I'm looking for justice. And tell them, I'm not afraid. Now go away. The lawyer turned pale, threw the envelope onto the seat of the Neva, and hurried back to his Mercedes, which immediately sped off, leaving behind only the smell of expensive gasoline and fear.
Voron felt a slight sense of satisfaction.
His reaction was pure and natural. He didn't run. He didn't call the police. He wasn't afraid. Following the law of nature, he accepted this challenge as inevitable. The game had only just begun, but now the rules were set. The city elite would act with dirty but civilized methods, and he would respond with his intuition and obsession with the truth.
The Raven picked up the envelope, casually slipped it into his pocket, and looked at the shadow. Leica looked him in the eye, and there was no doubt in her gaze. He started the engine, and the car roared obediently. He needed the next step. The lawyer had mentioned that their request was related to him not interfering in the case. That meant they had a weak link that they were afraid of losing. He needed to find someone who was below Zadorozhny, had direct access to his affairs, and was too weak to withstand Voron's heavy, calm gaze. He needed an amateur witness. He drove onto the highway, heading back to the center to begin his search. Voron returned to the traffic police headquarters, feeling invisible pressure on him. The warning from Zadorozhny, conveyed through a lawyer, not only did not scare him, but also confirmed that he was right. The sick individual flinched, showing that he had been touched where it hurt. In his hands was an envelope, which he demonstratively did not take, but which remained on the seat. Not a bribe, but payment for silence, which Voron, however, did not get rid of. He knew that in the city, even money could become a stranger's trail if used correctly. He needed someone who, while not part of the upper echelons of society, knew about Zadorozhny's schemes and was weak enough to reveal information under pressure. Captain Svetlova, although she was in cahoots with him, still acted within the procedural norms and could not interrogate Zadorozhny without solid evidence. Therefore, Voron focused on secondary figures. From the documents she provided him, he found a small subcontractor, Gennady Nikolaevich Shustov, whose logistics company regularly received contracts to transport equipment for Ural Zoloto, including for work on the very site where Vidrin had
blocked the license.
Shustov was summoned to the Internal Affairs Directorate as an amateur witness.
The interrogation took place in a small, stuffy office, where Voron preferred to be alone, without Svetlova. He knew that the presence of a police uniform would only reinforce the armor of lies. Shustov was a man in his 40s, with a puffy face, dressed in a cheap but flashy suit. He was constantly sweating, nervously rubbing his hands and hiding behind a thick folder with invoices, as if behind a shield. His eyes revealed a double fear, of the law and of those who had hired him. Gennady Nikolaevich, we don't need these papers, Voron said in a low, hoarse voice, gesturing toward the folder. He didn't shout or threaten. He simply spoke slowly, so that his words would sink into Shustov's consciousness. Official papers are words that mean nothing. I'm not interested in what's written, but in what happened. Shustov tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace. Ivan Andreevich, I'm just a logistician. I transport whatever they tell me to. Equipment, fuel, sometimes building materials. I'm not involved in Zadorozhny's big plans. I'm just a contractor. Voron did not listen to him. He placed his old hunting knife on the table, not as a threat, but as a sign of his world, his code. A knife whose blade had seen real blood and real work. And his heavy, calm gaze immediately fixed on Shustov's eyes,
a gaze that seemed to see not in front of him, but through the man, straight into his soul, where the truth was hidden. Voron began to talk not about contracts, but about the taiga. Your company, Gennady Nikolaevich, transported cargo to the area near the Istok stream. Voron began. It's almost a wild place. Tell me, when you drove up to the river, did you see a lot of moose there? Or maybe deer? As a logistician, you must have a keen eye. Animals come out to drink and leave tracks. Were there many? The question was so unexpected and unrelated to the official paperwork that Shustov was taken aback. He had expected questions about taxes, tonnage, and deadlines, but not about moose habits.
Well, I didn't pay attention, he muttered, nervously twisting his jacket sleeve. We were walking. It's a dense taiga forest. Where would the moose be? The taiga is never empty, Voron retorted. The taiga is a living organism.
If there are no moose there, it means something scared them away. Or killed them. You were transporting heavy equipment there. Did you see what kind of trees were there? Pine, spruce, or cedar? Old, century-old cedar that needs to be removed quickly so no one notices. Shustov blinked. His puffy face flushed. He tried to remember, but his memory was filled not with images of the forest, but with numbers on invoices. He was wrong about the basics. He was an amateur who came for money and saw nothing but money. I'm not a lumberjack. I don't know anything about tree species, Shustov mumbled. Voron leaned toward him, his voice becoming even quieter, but taking on a steely tone. The taiga does not forgive those who do not understand it. It does not forgive those who exploit it. You don't know anything about tree species, but you know exactly where you took the loaded trucks and where you drove them empty. Tell me, Gennady Nikolaevich, where did you wash your trucks after transporting equipment through the taiga mud? This question caught Shustov off guard. It's one thing to lie about moose and cedar trees, but quite another to lie about logistics. Well, at the car wash. At the city truck wash. It's expensive, but they have to be cleaned. No, Voron shook his head. You don't take trucks as dirty as Zadorozhny's to a city car wash. You know they could have gold-bearing sand or traces of rare, illegally cut wood on them. You wash them where no one can see them. Where? Voron kept his gaze fixed on him, piercing through the armor of lies that was held together by fear of the law. Now Shustov was afraid not of the law, but of the fact that Voron knew more about the taiga than he knew about his own life. Shustov realized that Voron was not the police with their papers. Voron was a return to the taiga, which he had tried to deceive. Okay, there was one abandoned area. His voice broke into a whisper. An old quarry. In the northeast, near the ring road. There's a pond there. They used it for technical washing. Yes, there. Raven nodded. Where the dirt flows into the pond without leaving any traces on the asphalt. Makes sense. He picked up Shustov's folder, which he had been using as a shield. He took out the last delivery note. The date on it was just 3 days before Vitrin's murder. The destination was the same site by the Istok stream. The cargo was special equipment. You took it out on the same day, said Voron. The equipment wasn't needed. Why? Because Vidrin had already refused the license. Zadorozhny lost, and Vidrin became an obstacle. Shustov began to tremble. "I didn't know they were going to kill him. I swear I was just transporting it."
I didn't want to.
Voron straightened up. He knew that Shustov wasn't a murderer. He was just a cog in this machine of greed. An amateur who had been used. But he was the link. Zadorozhny,
Did he personally oversee this shipment? Or did one of his trusted associates do it? A man who doesn't like it when his plans fall apart.
His right-hand man, basically. Leonid Ivanovich Voronov. He's not a lawyer, he's
a former military man, I heard. He controlled everything on site. A very unpleasant guy, a real beast. Shustov finally breathed out the truth. Voron felt the threads coming together. The smell of greed now had a name and a face. He had obtained the information he needed without breaking a single city law. Using only the survival psychology of a small man who feared not the law, but the vengeance of nature. He had pierced the armor of lies of an official who feared not the law, but a return to the taiga, which he did not understand. The raven nodded, indicating that the interrogation was over. "You can go, Gennady Nikolaevich, but if I hear a single word about our conversation, I'll come for you myself, and we'll talk about moose and cedar trees without this asphalt." The threat was quiet, but for Shustov, who had just glimpsed into the abyss, it was more real than any prison term. Voron left the office. Svetlova was waiting for him. "I got the warrant, Ivan Andreevich, but, you know, it was difficult. And it's only for a search of the workshop, not for Zadorozhny."
What did Shustov say?
Voron did not go into details about the moose. He gave me a link, Captain, a name, and he confirmed that Zadorozhny personally supervised the operation. Most importantly, he named the place where they cleaned the cars of any traces. A quarry in the northeast. There may be something else there that they didn't have time to hide. He looked at Karelin, who was standing at a distance, watching them. "Colonel, the sick individual has started to slip up." She named a name. Leonid Voronov, Zadorozhny's right-hand man, a former military man. "And now we need to find the link between him and the murder before he disappears." Voron knew that this Voronov was no amateur like the lawyer or Shustov. He was a hunter who covered for the main predator. And now the hunt was on. The office where they worked was plunged into late evening twilight, lit only by the merciless light of a desk lamp falling on a pile of documents. Svetlova, no longer letting Voron take a step, sat opposite him, feverishly comparing the information he had extracted from Shustov with the official protocols. Ivan Andreevich, on the other hand, sat in deep silence, motionless, as if he were not a man, but a granite boulder that was simply observing. He was no longer interested in minor details. His heavy, calm gaze was fixed on the big picture, on the invisible thread that connected Vidrin's body at the edge of the park with the offices in the mirrored skyscrapers. He knew that Oleg Vitalyevich Zadorozhny was at the center of this web, but he needed to see the whole chain, from the poison in the ground to the rot at the top of the government. "Look, Ivan Andreevich." Svetlova ran her pen over the printout. Her voice no longer had its former icy confidence. Now it sounded more like anxious admiration. On August 4, Vidring signs an official refusal to grant Ural Zoloto a license to develop the Istok stream, a formal refusal based on environmental standards. 2 days later, on August 6th, Ural Zolotol files an appeal. On the 7th, Shustov takes all the equipment,
On the 11th, Vedran's body is found. It seems they didn't have time to wait. They wanted everything to disappear before anyone started digging into his refusal. Voron nodded slowly. It wasn't just that they didn't have time to wait. They wanted the threat to disappear. Vedran, having become an obstacle, had to be removed so as not to create problems in the future. Greed does not tolerate losses, Captain. They didn't just lose this round. They saw him as a sick animal that could infect the system, and they eliminated it to preserve their balance, but they disrupted mine. He took out his notebook, which contained a diagram of a tire tread, and placed it next to Zadorozhny's photo. The photo showed a tall, confident man with a stern but empty gaze. The perfect asphalt functionary. Svetlova continued, leafing through the meeting minutes. We checked Zadorozhny. Officially, he is the owner of Ural Zoloto, but unofficially, he owns half of the city's construction market, the Gorodskoy Standard Holding Company. This is the link between the taiga and the asphalt. Money obtained from illegal mining or logging is laundered through completely legal, large-scale construction. We're talking hundreds of millions, maybe even billions. And here another name appears, one that constantly appears alongside him in all city projects, where it is necessary to quickly obtain a permit or get the green light. Arkady Nikolaevich Smirnov, Deputy Mayor for Development. At that moment, the office became noticeably colder, as if the door to an ice cellar had been opened. Voron felt the thread he was holding in his hands become thick and steel-like. The murder of an official from the Istok stream led not just to a businessman, but to the highest echelons of power. Arkady Smirnov was the one who provided the armor of lies at the highest level. Vedran was just a pawn that Zadorozhny swept away to protect his king. Deputy Mayor, Voron repeated quietly, and there was no surprise or fear in his voice, only a deep, philosophical understanding of how far human greed can go. He is not afraid of the law. He is only afraid that someone will break his law, the law of greed. Svetlova, sensing the weight of that name, hesitated for the first time. Ivan Andreevich, we don't even have the right to approach Smirnov without direct evidence. It's a political scandal. Karelin could lose his job, and You are looking for the law, and I am looking for the truth, Voron interrupted her, his gaze absolutely unwavering. If Vedran was corrupt, then apparently at some point, he tried to restore the natural order of things. When he realized that his own greed had led to the desecration of the land he supposedly loved. Or maybe he just became greedier than he was allowed to be. It doesn't matter. The point is that Smirnov and Zadorozhny are one and the same. If we want to find the truth, we need to find the dirt they are hiding, the city taiga they are using to cover their tracks. Voron unfolded a large map of Yekaterinburg and the surrounding area. Svetlova pointed to the Istok district, to an abandoned factory in the north. Voron traced her finger further, following the logic of a predator who always has two lairs, one for hunting, the other for resting. Zadorozhny must have a base, a place where he feels like the master, where he can control both what happens in the taiga and what happens here. A place that serves as a bridge between his two worlds, said Voron. He knew that high-ranking officials and businessmen always build their fortresses somewhere in nature, on the outskirts of the city, to demonstrate their power over both worlds. He traced all the transport hubs, all the main arteries that led from the city to the mining areas. His finger stopped at a large object marked on the map as Private Hunting Grounds, Cedar.
It was located 150 kilometers from Yekaterinburg, right next to the border of a specially protected natural area, which was in itself an incredible violation
Of the natural order of things. Svetlova confirmed. Yes, that's his. A luxury resort. Zadorozhny spends all his weekends there, hunting. He also receives all his partners there. And, according to rumors, government officials. The raven raised its head, and his eyes showed his obsession with the truth. The hunting lodge. Cedar. 2 steps from the restricted area. The name of the lodge is pure irony. This is not a vacation, Captain. This is the deep hole, where he hides his gold and his lies, where urban greed and taiga filth meet to defile each other. We need to go there, not with a warrant, but another way.
Like in the taiga. Unnoticed. Otherwise, he'll have time to cover his tracks. And we'll lose not only the Vidrin case, but also our last hope for justice. Svetlova looked at him, and this time did not argue.
She saw that their case went far beyond the criminal code.
It was a battle with the system, where honest but fragile truth stood against monolithic lies.
She understood that Voron, with his instincts and contempt for city rules, was their only chance. She nodded, accepting the full weight and possible consequences of their next step.
Oleg Zadorozhny's Kedar Recreation Center was located 150 kilometers from Yekaterinburg, in the middle of nowhere, on the border between a permitted and a protected area. Voron spent almost 3 hours getting there, and with every kilometer, his contempt for the city elite only grew stronger.
The road leading to the private estate was perfectly clean, like a ribbon laid straight into the living heart of the taiga. But beyond the gates of Kedra began mud and darkness, covered by a high death fence and a dozen surveillance cameras.
Voron left his Niva 1.5 kilometers from the fence, near an old abandoned clearing that had long since ceased to be cleared, and walked on foot, taking Shadow on a short leash. This place was a mockery of nature. Huge, newly built cottages in the Russian terem style stood next to manicured lawns and artificial ponds that screamed of senseless luxury that had nothing to do with life. Security here was set up according to city rules. Lots of cameras, motion sensors, zero intuition. Raven, a former senior state inspector of the reserve, knew that real security was the ability to read the wind and tracks. These same people, judging by their positioning, relied on electronics and instructions that could always be circumvented.
He and Shadow slipped through the sparse young undergrowth, ignoring the cameras which, according to his calculations, were looking strictly forward and upward, and came out to the perimeter.
Ivan Andreevich knew that illegal business was not kept in the main house, where deputy mayors and other important guests were received. He was looking for the operations center, the deep hole, where the loot was hidden, and from where the business was run. The Shadow led him to a large hangar, disguised as a snowmobile shed, located far from the main hotel complex, almost at the very border of the reserve.
Judging by the smells, the main technological road led from here, which was apparently cleared of snow and dirt only when necessary. A real bridge between Zadorozhny and his illegal mines. They walked around the hangar.
Voron took advantage of the fact that the guards were probably checking the perimeter on schedule. He found a low ventilation window covered with metal mesh that led to a storage room. The mesh was old and poorly welded.
He easily removed it with his hunting knife, working silently like a predator. Voron lifted Shadow up to the window. Laika froze, her nostrils quivering. She smelled greed in all its fullness. Damp earth, oil, cedar resin, and a faint metallic scent.
Raven lowered the dog. "Wait, Shadow. Not a sound," he whispered to her.
Ivan Andreevich, using his sinewy muscles, easily climbed through the narrow window and found himself inside the hangar. The hangar was huge, and the light from the small window fell on only part of its contents. It was not just a garage. It was an illegal warehouse.
Along the far wall lay huge sawn cedar logs, the very same rare, centuries-old trees whose remains he had seen at the abandoned sawmill in the city. Their resinous, bitter smell, intensified in the confined space, was intoxicating.
Zadorozhny wasn't just cutting down the forest. He was destroying the symbol of the taiga for profit. And here, in his lair, he kept his trophies.
Further away stood heavy, dirty equipment. Several all-terrain vehicles and trucks with tires for deep off-road driving. Voron moved closer. There was still reddish soil stuck to the wheels and treads, the same soil he had seen on the maps near the Istok stream. And this soil was everywhere. But the most important thing was what he found in the center of the hangar, under a tarpaulin.
Raven lifted the edge of the tarpaulin. Underneath were hundreds of bags filled with heavy, wet sand, mixed with pebbles. Next to them stood primitive washing equipment. It was gold. Not ingots, but raw, dirty ore that still had to be cleaned.
Raven took a pinch of sand, and the grains of gold, small but obvious, glimmered faintly in the dim light. "A violation of the natural order of things," said Voron, his voice quiet, but sounding like a sentence.
Zadorozhny was not just a businessman. He was a looter. He desecrated the land, killed its riches, and when Vidrin got in his way, he killed him without hesitation.
Voron felt a wave of righteous anger rise within him, but he immediately suppressed it. Rage was a luxury he could not afford. He needed pure, cold truth. He returned to the trucks. He was looking for a specific trace, the one that had brought Vidrin's body to Shartash Park. He found it on the concrete floor, in a puddle of dirty water. Another perfectly clear trace of that very same non-standard tire, which he had already seen twice, at the murder scene and at the abandoned sawmill.
This trace was the missing link that finally closed the circle. The killer didn't just use Zadorozhny's car. He most likely came for Vidrin's body right from here, from this lair, to then take it to the city and stage an accident.
Voron knew he had to leave. He had obtained evidence that no financial reports could provide. The cedar, the gold, the traces. Now he needed to find the hunter who was covering for the predator. Leonid Voronov. He was sure that this former military man, Zadorozhny's right-hand man, was the professional who had committed the murder, and then made the very mistake of an amateur by leaving someone else's tire tracks behind. Because even a professional operating in an unfamiliar urban environment leaves behind traces of human logic driven by greed.
Voron carefully climbed out of the window, putting the screen back in place. He took Shadow, and they began to move away from the hangar as silently as they had come. He looked at the cedar base. It was a poisoned nest where urban corruption nested, using the taiga as a source of its venom. His obsession with the truth now had a physical embodiment. He had to act quickly, before Zadorozhny realized that his deep burrow had been discovered. The Raven felt the tension caused by the proximity of a huge, hidden danger squeezing him. He knew that now that he had found what they breathed, they would sense his presence and strike back. And that strike would not be a warning, but an attempt to eliminate him. Voron gathered his belongings in the rented apartment that Karelin had provided for him. A small, soulless, government-owned one-room apartment located in a residential area, among thousands of identical windows behind which the same quiet life went on. He rolled up his binoculars, checked the sharpness of the hunting knife he always carried with him, and tightened the laces on his heavy, well-worn boots. There was no haste in his actions, only cold, methodical precision, as if before a long, difficult, dangerous hunt. He knew that after he found Zadorozhny's deep hole, their world had narrowed to the limit. He had become a hunter who could now become prey himself. There was a knock at the door. It was Svetlova. She hadn't called or warned him, which in itself spoke of a high level of nervousness and secrecy. She entered, barely closing the door behind her. Her eyes, usually so cold and logical, now burned with an unhealthy, anxious fire. She was holding a thin plastic tablet in her hands, something that in his world would be called a sign of asphalt, but which now contained a potential death sentence for Zadorozhny. I did what I could, Ivan Andreyevich. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. I didn't request an official search of the Cedar base. It's impossible. Smirnov covers everything up.
But I made our security guys gather everything related to Zadorozhny and his right-hand man, Leonid Voronov. Unofficially, through old connections. She handed him the tablet. Voron took it.
The device felt foreign in his hands, like a piece of useless glass. But he forced himself to concentrate. On the screen was a detailed dossier on Oleg Zadorozhny, not an official biography, but what was hidden in the shadows of the city. Connections with Deputy Mayor Smirnov, dark spots in the 90s, and most importantly, information about Leonid Voronov, a former Special Forces officer dismissed from service with scandal 10 years ago. An excellent marksman, a specialist in survival and mop-up operations. A professional who knew how to work in the forest and who was Voronov's opposite. He was his bodyguard, and then became the head of security for Ural Zolota, Svetlova explained. He's not just a security guard. He managed all the logistics in the taiga. He's the link between Zadorozhny and Vidrin's murder. He had both the motive and the skills to stage an accident on the edge of the park. And he knows how to cover his tracks. Voron nodded, his heavy, calm gaze fixed on the photograph of Leonid Voronov, a man with a stern, uncompromising face, eyes that showed neither human soul nor fear. He was a hunter who covered for the main predator. But unlike Voron, he served greed, not order. They know that I know, Raven said quietly. I scared them off. They wouldn't have left me alive after I found their warehouse. Now they'll be hunting. Svetlova bit her lip. That's why I'm here. I came to warn you. Zadorozhny has disappeared from the city. He's probably at his base. But his people, they're looking for you. Voronov is no amateur. He won't send lawyers. I heard that they are setting a trap. Perhaps they want to lure you out of the city to stage an accident. Your method, Ivan Andreyevich, it works in the taiga. But here, in the city, they play by their own rules. They will do anything to stop you. She looked at him with desperate candor. She, a city girl, for the first time since they had met, abandoned her logic and offered her honest,
but fragile truth. She saw that Voron was not just a consultant, but a force of nature that she, by unspoken agreement, could not afford to lose.
They won't, said Voron, and there was no boastfulness in his voice, only confidence. He handed her back her tablet. They think I'll hide. They think I'll play by their rules, look for evidence in their courts. They're wrong.
If I wait, they'll use Smirnov to cover up the case, and Vidrin's death will become just another statistic of lies. I'm going after them. I'll be the bait myself. Voron slung his backpack over his shoulder.
It contained no gadgets, only the bare minimum for survival. Binoculars and an old hunting knife. He knew that his strength lay not in weapons, but in understanding the logic of a cornered man. He had to force Zadorozhny, and most importantly, his Voronova, to make a fatal mistake.
Where are you going? Svetlova asked, her voice sounding helpless. I'm going where they feel like they're in charge, Voron replied. To the city taiga.
They know I found their workshop. They'll be waiting for me there. Voronov is a hunter. He'll wait to eliminate the threat. He'll play in the taiga, but in his own city. And that's an amateur's mistake.
He doesn't know that in the real taiga, there are no friends or enemies. There is only life and justice. He opened the door. The shadow that had been lying at his feet all this time obediently rose. I'm not asking you to take any risks, Captain, but I need your help. If I don't get in touch in 4 hours, you must inform Karelin, and you must strike at Smirnov. That is their greatest weakness. Svetlova nodded, her face tense. She understood that Voron, who despised city laws, was going to use their own lies against them. She couldn't go with him, but she could provide him with backup. She, a woman of the streets, was now acting according to his internal code of honor. The Raven stepped outside. He felt the hustle and bustle of the city and the lies recede. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was looking to restore order. He knew that his path was one of obsession with the truth, and that at the end of it, awaited not glory, but the quiet sadness of conscious, yet fragile justice. He got into the car, looking in the rearview mirror. Svetlova was still standing by the window, and there was no doubt in her eyes. He drove towards the industrial zone, to the city taiga, where a trap awaited the Raven. The Raven returned to the city taiga, to the territory of an abandoned workshop. Late at night, when the city lights dimmed and the industrial zone was plunged into complete, impenetrable darkness, broken only by the faint light of distant streetlights. He knew he was walking to his certain death, but that certainty was his main weapon. A hunter who knows he is expected ceases to be a victim. He becomes bait that the predator cannot ignore. Zadorozhny, or more likely his right-hand man, Leonid Voronov, decided to stop Voron, using his own methods, to get rid of him by staging an accident or an attack by vagrants in a place where no one would look for him. Voron stopped the Neva far from the workshop, hiding it in the shadow of a wrecked railroad car. The shadow walked alongside him, its low, intermittent growling the only sound that broke the dead silence. Here, in this labyrinth of concrete, rusty metal, and broken glass, there was an atmosphere that Voron despised most of all. Artificial danger. In the taiga, danger was honest. A hungry bear, a landslide,
an icy river.
Here, danger was insidious, hidden around corners, paid for with money, driven by greed. He did not move across open spaces. Instead, he pressed himself against the wall of a dilapidated warehouse, feeling its cold, damp stone.
He moved slowly, silently, like a shadow, listening not for sounds, but for the absence of sounds. There is always background noise in the city. Distant barking, the hum of cars.
Here, however, there was perfect silence, a sign that someone was waiting. Raven did not trust his eyes in this darkness, distorted by shadows from uneven surfaces. He trusted his sense of smell and his understanding of human logic. He smelled expensive but cheap cologne mixed with the smell of cigarette smoke carried by the wind from afar. It was a foreign scent, belonging to people who tried to be clean in the dirt. He went around a pile of rusty pipes. A shadow quietly bumped into his leg, growling softly. Ahead, at the gate leading to the workshop area, stood two figures.
They were dressed in dark functional clothing,
But their postures, their nervous rubbing of their hands, and their frequent, sharp movements of their heads betrayed them as city amateurs who did not know how to behave in real danger. They were trained, but not toughened up. They were waiting for a shot, not a fight, a struggle, or a chase. Voron realized that this was not Leonid Voronov. Voronov, a former Special Forces soldier, would not have waited for him so openly. These were just security guards, sent to eliminate the problem and take away the body to stage a fight among alcoholics or an accident in the dark. They were too confident in their strength and in the fact that Voron was just an old man with a notebook. He released Shadow. Shadow, go, quietly. Voron ordered. The dog, obedient and intelligent, slipped forward, using the low shadows. She was his unspoken intervention of fate. She circled around the figures, approaching from a direction they certainly did not expect a threat to come from behind them, which they considered protected by the wall. The raven walked straight ahead, but slowly, using his heavy, calm gaze as a weapon. He stepped out of the shadows. His figure, carved from stone and dressed in hiking clothes, appeared suddenly, like a ghost of the taiga. One of the attackers, tall with a thick neck, jerked sharply, pulling out a pistol. It was the first mistake, a mistake made in panic. "Don't," Raven said in a low, hoarse voice. "You don't know how to shoot. You think asphalt gives you the right to kill. It only gives you fear." The second attacker, shorter and more agile, tried to flank him. But at that moment, there was a short, muffled squeal. The shadow, creeping up silently, sank its teeth into the leg of the first tall attacker, causing him to drop his weapon and fall. The second, distracted by the scream, did not have time to react when Raven, using his strength and speed, characteristic of a man who survives rather than lives, sent him to the ground with one sharp blow to the solar plexus. The fight was short, brutal, and fair, unlike Vidron's murder in the city. Raven did not strike unnecessary blows. He neutralized them using his survival psychology. He knew where to strike to stop the aggression without killing. Both attackers lay gasping and writhing in pain, their weapons lying on the dirty concrete. Voron looked at them. Their faces showed not only physical suffering, but also complete disbelief at what had happened. They couldn't believe that this old man, whom they were supposed to easily eliminate, had turned their trap for Raven into their own grave. He knew they were afraid. They were not afraid of death, but of retribution, which came to them not in the form of the police, but in the form of the very nature they had tried to desecrate. Raven crouched down next to the tall attacker.
The shadow sat nearby, breathing evenly, waiting for the command. Raven spoke quietly, but every word carried weight. Who sent you? The ravens? And what did he want? The attacker, gasping for breath, could only squeeze out one name.
Leonid, he said, you know too much. He said that if you came, you would have to disappear here. That it would be suicide.
Suicide, Voron grimaced. What a lie. Where is he? Where is your Zadorozhny? Base, cedar. Zadorozhny is there. Voronov, he was supposed to go to the airport, but he said he'd wait for you here, croaked the other attacker. He wanted to see you. He said you're a hunter who needs to learn how to be prey. Voron frowned.
Leonid Voronov was a professional. He wouldn't wait for him in a trap he had set himself. If he told them he would wait for him here, it meant that Voronov was already here. Voron looked up. Too late. He felt his presence. It wasn't a movement or a sound, but a shift in the energy of the place. Voronov was no amateur. He was a real hunter who had used these two as bait and was now waiting for Raven to start questioning them so he could deliver the decisive blow. He was somewhere above, on the roof of one of the buildings, preparing to fire. Voron jumped up, grabbed Shadow, and rushed to the nearest pile of construction debris that could provide him with cover. His instincts kicked in instantly, but his obsession with the truth had betrayed him. He had spent too much time talking to amateurs. He heard a hollow sound whistling over his head, accompanied by a dry click that could only have come from a pistol with a silencer. Voronov. The hunter was waiting for him in the city taiga, having shaken off Leonid Voronov in the labyrinth of concrete rubble and rusty pipes of the city taiga. Ivan Andreevich Belov knew that there was no time to think. He left the two stunned amateurs and the shadow that guarded them in the abandoned workshop. After changing his clothes and checking that his Neva was in working order, he drove straight to the city center. Voronov, the hunter who had been covering for the predator, would now hunt for real. But its master, Oleg Zadorozhny, would feel the blow before his guard had time to return. Voron knew that the main predator always hides in the largest, most inaccessible burrow. And his nest was not the suburban cedar, but a glass, indifferent skyscraper, whose floors were controlled by money and influence. He had to go to the most poisoned nest. Penetrating Oleg Zadorozhny's private office on the 45th floor was impossible from the point of view of urban logic. But Raven knew that his strength lay in his unpredictability and in his heavy, calm gaze, which pierced any armor of lies.
He passed the first security cordon by pretending to be a courier with an urgent package, then the second by using a psychological trick. He did not run, but walked with such imperturbable, unhurried confidence that the guards, accustomed to panic
And haste, simply could not imagine that a man in a hiking jacket could pose a threat. They were amateurs at recognizing real danger. He reached his goal like an invisible predator that appeared out of nowhere. Zadorozhny's office was the pinnacle of the City of Shadows. Panoramic windows overlooking the shining, indifferent nighttime Yekaterinburg, polished marble, dark wood, and a huge desk like an altar to his greed. Zadorozhny sat at this desk, in a perfectly ironed suit, looking as if he feared nothing in the world. the untouchable king of asphalt. He flinched when Raven entered his personal space without knocking, breaking the perfect, artificial silence.
Zadorozhny was holding a glass of amber cognac in his hand, but his hand was shaking. He had probably just received information that his people had failed. How did you get in here? Zadorozhny struggled to keep his voice full of haughty contempt.
Security! Voron ignored his hysterical cry. He closed the door, cutting off the predator from his pack, and slowly walked to the table.
He resembled a sign of a beast that had come to this luxurious artificial world to restore balance. Your security guards are amateurs. They know how to press buttons, but they don't know how to read tracks. You taught them to fear the law, but you didn't teach them to fear the truth. His voice was low, hoarse, sounding like a sentence pronounced not by a man, but by nature itself. Zadorozhny gathered what remained of his arrogance and stood up. I don't know who you are, Belov, but you have invaded my private office, and I will call the police. They will arrest you. You don't understand who you're dealing with.
You don't know the laws of the asphalt.
Voron stopped at the table, and his heavy, calm, and incredibly attentive gaze pinned Zadorozhny to the spot.
There was no anger or vengeance in that gaze, only a cold, philosophical understanding of life and death. I know who you are, Oleg Vitalovich. You are a man who desecrated the taiga for the sake of dirty gold. You are a man who thought you could kill an official who stood in your way and blame it all on an accident. You thought you could cover up someone else's tire tracks and the smell of greed with your papers and connections. You thought I was a helpless amateur from the forest. You made the biggest mistake. Voron did not threaten him with the law. He spoke of natural justice. He placed a pinch of gold-bearing sand, which he had taken from deep Nora at the cedar base, on the perfectly clean, polished table. The sand, glistening in the light of the expensive chandelier, looked like dirt ingrained in luxury. Then he placed a small piece of century-old cedar, broken off from a log, next to it. These two symbols of the taiga were more frightening than any warrant. It's not the police who will stop you, Zadorozhny, Voron continued. It's balance. You broke it when you decided you could destroy what you didn't create. You thought Vedran was just a bug, but his death left a mark that even the city couldn't sweep away. You brought his body in a car with tires that perfectly matched those in your dirty hangar. You wanted everyone to think that a beast had killed him. But the real beast is you, hiding behind glass and a suit. Zadorozhny, who had begun to sweat, backed away. He was sure that his poisoned nest was impregnable. He thought he was untouchable. But Raven, standing before him like the spirit of the land he had desecrated, spoke of things that were beyond his money and power. Raven understood his logic as a man driven by greed. He killed because he was afraid of losing control and wealth. You don't understand. I'm building a city. I'm giving people jobs. Vedran wanted too much. He was corrupt. Zadorozhny tried to justify himself. Vedran may have been a sick individual, but you are the root of the disease. You are the one who upsets the balance. A sick individual, Zadorozhny, must be removed from the ecosystem so that it does not poison everything around it. Raven looked at him without a trace of emotion. You tried to hide your filth behind a shield of lies and thought you could buy justice. But justice is when everything returns to its rightful place. Murder for greed is the most terrible crime against nature, because it breeds only death and lies. Zadorozhny understood. Voron didn't come with a tape recorder or a warrant. He came with a truth that couldn't be denied.
He came not as a cop, but as retribution. At that moment, when Zadorozhny finally felt caught, he broke down. He fell into a chair, his disbelief replaced by pure animal fear. Voron stepped away from the table. Your hunter, Voronov, will break too.
He served you not out of loyalty, but out of greed. And now that your nest is poisoned, he will only save himself. No sooner had he said this than the silence of the office was pierced by the growing wail of sirens coming from the streets below.
Svetlova. She hadn't forgotten about him. She, a woman of the asphalt, had done what she had to do, using city laws to ensure natural justice. The raven looked at Zadorozhny, who was staring at the windows in horror.
They're coming for you, Oleg Vitalovich. You thought you could get away with it, but the taiga always gets its revenge. It left a trail that you couldn't cover up. The sirens burst into Zadorozhny's private office, not just with sound, but with a physical wave, reflecting off the panoramic windows surrounding the top of the skyscraper.
Zadorozhny, broken not by the threat, but by the naked truth, stared at Voron in shock, his face ashen and contorted.
All his armor of lies, built up over years of power and impunity, collapsed at the touch of dirt. Grains of gold and a piece of cedar lying on his immaculate desk. Voron remained motionless, like an observer who had merely recorded the moment when the disturbed equilibrium began to restore itself. He nodded slightly to himself. Svetlova had not failed him. The door swung open, letting the hustle and bustle and anxiety into the sterile air of the office. Colonel Karelin was the first to rush in, breathless and angry, his uniform jacket rumpled, his face expressing the fury of a bureaucrat whose rules had been grossly violated. Behind him, pale, but with eyes burning with cold determination, entered Captain Vera Svetlova. Belov, what the hell? What have you done here? Karelin barely restrained his shout at the consultant.
He immediately turned to Zadorozhny, trying to show respect for the big businessman, even though he had been caught red-handed.
Oleg Vitalovich, I apologize for this circus. It's some kind of ridiculous mistake. No mistake, Colonel. Svetlova's voice was quiet, but it sounded louder than Karelin's shout. She walked past her superiors, her gaze fixed on Zadorozhny, who now looked not like a predator, but like a hunted man. We are acting on a warrant. The grounds? Suspicion of organizing the murder of official Vidrin and illegal activities. Mr.
Zadorozhny, you are under arrest.
Zadorozhny tried to protest, but his words sounded like pitiful, meaningless bleating. He was ready for court, for lawyers, but not for being caught by a man from the taiga and his own investigator.
The web of corruption began to unravel at a staggering speed, because Svetlova, despite the pressure and fear for her career, did the most important thing. She took action. Voron stepped aside, allowing the asphalt to deal with his poisoned burrow.
He did not interfere with the arrest. But his heavy, calm gaze did not leave Captain Svetlova. Ignoring Karelin's nervous hissing, she methodically began to document the scene. She brought a special bag to the table and carefully collected the grains of truth that Voron had used for his psychological attack. Gold-bearing sand, a piece of cedar. When Zadorozhny was led away under escort, looking like a pathetic parody of an untouchable king, Karelin finally turned to Voron, his voice a mixture of anger and amazement. You violated all the instructions, Belov.
I don't know how to explain this to Smirnov. You're acting like a gangster, not a consultant. Smirnov is the next sick individual, Voron replied quietly. And I am acting like a man who is seeking to restore order. Your system did not work. My instincts worked. I do not seek your glory, and I do not want your praise, Colonel. He turned to Svetlova. In her eyes he saw not pride, but a deep awareness of how fragile and precious justice can be. He handed her his old worn notebook with notes about clues and dates. Here is the entire chronology. The foreign tire track, Shustov's testimony about the car wash, the coordinates of the cedar base, and the entire chain leading to Smirnov. I couldn't find Leonid Voronov. He's a hunter, and he knew how to get away. But his master has now been caught. Without its main predator, his pack will scatter. Svetlova took the notebook. Her fingers touched his hand, and the gesture was full of respect and recognition that needed no words. We'll find him. We found 2 of your amateurs. They've already started talking. With your evidence, we'll be able to get warrants for both Cedar and Smirnov. You did what we couldn't do. Thank you. Voron, in turn, looked at her, and for the first time, a note far from contempt flashed in his heavy, calm gaze. He saw that not everyone in this city of shadows was a helpless amateur. Captain Vera Svetlova, with her strict logic and courage, acted according to an internal code of honor that was not very different from his own. She was a person of the asphalt, but she risked everything to find the truth, and that was a value he could not ignore. You are a person who can read traces, said Raven, referring to her ability to penetrate bureaucracy and lies. Continue. Now it's your hunt. He walked away from her, leaving her amid the chaos he had created to restore order. The web of corruption had been cut, and the case of Vidrin's death had now turned into a large-scale investigation against the city's elite. Raven did not wait for praise or even a formal inquiry. He knew his role was over. He had come to repay a debt and restore the natural order of things. He had found the sick individuals and pointed them out. Voron left the skyscraper. His path lay downwards, out of this poisoned nest, into the night, into the city that still breathed lies and greed. He got into his Neva, where Shadow was waiting for him. Laika nudged his hand with her nose in greeting. Raven stroked her. He felt the hustle and bustle of the city begin to recede, giving way to cold, clear determination. He did not look back at the shining skyscraper. His work here was done. He was not looking for glory. He was looking for the trail home. Raven left Ekaterinburg at dawn. The night spent in the city left its mark on him. Not fatigue, but a feeling of disgust that he always felt when confronted with senseless, poisoned greed. He drove his old Neva away from the shining skyscrapers, which now, in the first rays of the sun, looked not like symbols of progress, but like cold, empty monuments of lies. Behind him lay the city of shadows, its predators caught, but its disease, corruption, remained within its walls, in its laws, in the very atmosphere. The shadow lying next to him on the seat was asleep. For her, the hunt was over, and now she sensed the approach of the trail home. The Raven felt the same. With every kilometer, with every pine tree that appeared on the side of the road, his breathing became more even, his gaze clearer. He was returning to his world.
where the rules were simple, cruel, but fair. He knew that it would not end today. Zadorozhny's arrest was only the beginning.
Smirnov, the deputy mayor, and others who had covered up for the poisoned nest would try to fight him off and hush up the case, using their influence.
And Leonid Voronov, the hunter who had slipped away into the night, would be somewhere out there in the taiga, either hiding or preparing for revenge. Voron had no doubt that their paths would cross again. True natural justice always takes time, but his task in the City of Shadows was complete. He had come reluctantly, but restored the balance that had been disrupted by the murder. He did not seek glory and refused all praise. He simply did his job, using his instincts where urban logic had reached an impasse. He found grains of truth in the dirt that had been overlooked by the detectives. He thought about Captain Svetlova, a person of the asphalt, but with an internal code of honor.
She risked everything to strike at Zadorozhny. She was not the helpless amateur he despised. She had strength and an obsession with truth that could survive even in a decaying city.
It was his only but important revelation of the asphalt. Not all people who live by the laws of the city are sick individuals. Some of them fight. Raven stopped the car on a hill from where he could see a last farewell view of the city.
He got out, breathing in the clean, frosty air, which was no longer saturated with smoke and nervousness. He took out his binoculars, not to look at the city, but to check the forest that began just beyond the hill. His world. He felt a sense of duty fulfilled, but not relief. A quiet sadness remained in his soul. Sadness that human greed was capable of defiling the earth, the soul, and the law. The murder of Voron. This whole web of lies and corruption was not a tragedy, but a violation of the natural order of things, and he, the Raven, was merely an instrument for restoring order. He got back in the car, started the engine, and drove down the narrow forest road. The asphalt disappeared, giving way to earth and stones. This was his trail home.
With each turn, civilization receded, giving way to the majestic, harsh, and honest taiga. He felt his body and mind relax, returning to their natural state. He drove past an old, fallen cedar tree that had once served as a landmark.
The Raven looked up at the sky. It was deep blue, untainted by city smog. And at that moment, in the perfect silence broken only by the rustle of tires on gravel, he heard a crow caw. Not the one that gave him his nickname, but a real, wild cry that sounded like a greeting, like a sign of a beast returning to its lair. The Raven smiled. It was not joy, but a deep philosophical realization that his place was here.
Not in the City of Shadows, but in the silence and justice of the taiga. He was not seeking revenge, he was seeking order. And now that order had been restored, he could return to his business. Epilogue. Ivan Andreevich Belov and his faithful Laika, Shadow, went deeper into the taiga. The city and its shadows remained behind, becoming only a distant, unpleasant memory. He knew that the sick individuals would try to return, but as long as he was here, balance would be maintained. For him, the most terrible crime was a violation of the natural order of things, and his job was to put everything back in its place.